All right, let's talk a little bit about orchestration. This is not going to be some comprehensive class. I will not cram 4 years of study into a 10-minute video, but I can do little, quick tips, like little things that I've learned in school or little things that I've learned along the way, at sessions or from orchestrators. I can do that. I can put little quick tips into videos and compile them. So let's start with number 1, melody. If you want a melody to be heard, make sure you put it into enough instruments. Something very common when you hear those really lush melodies, those really big, like John Williams-esque or late romanticism stuff where you have these soaring melodies, usually that means that a large portion of the orchestra is playing the melody. So something you will see very often is you will have the first violins play the melody in a high octave, second violins doubling 1 octave lower, you have the violas doubling another octave lower, so you already have the melody playing in 3 octaves right there. Sometimes even the cello will be on the melody, or at least half of the cello section. This doesn't work in mock-ups, by the way, so careful with that. But normally the easiest way is to just have the cello and basses play in octaves, play the bass line. Done. That's your string section. Most of them play the melody in octaves, and then you have the bass line played in octaves. Boom. Then what you're going to see very often is that the woodwinds are going to be doing exactly the same thing. So the piccolo is going to play the high string line, and then the regular flute is going to play an octave lower, doubled by oboe, doubled sometimes also by clarinet, depending on how high it is. Then another clarinet an octave lower, maybe English horn octave lower, and then bassoon, bass clarinet, double the cello and the basses. That's your woodwind section. Done. So they're playing exactly the same thing. And then you can have the brass fill in the chords. You could have the trumpet double the melody as well. Not quite as common, but it happens. But so horns and trombones are really great for filling in the chords now between the bass line and the melody, because you really have the melody covered now. You have it in several octaves playing across the strings and woodwinds. So someone needs to do the chord work now. And this is really the trick. Don't be shy to have a shit ton of instruments play in unison or play in octaves. If you really want to bring a line out, put a bunch of instruments on it. Have them play together. It's also nice for a section when they actually play as a section instead of being separated out. Likewise, you can have the melody also played in the horns, like if you have a really soaring horn melody, but that will usually also be doubled. Like usually you will have like the cello section, at least half of them play with the horns. So you have this really soaring quality in the horns all of a sudden. Sometimes also the violas. Sometimes you will have the bassoon doubling the horns as well. Sometimes even the clarinet, depending on what colors you want to choose. Brass tends to be generally the loudest in the orchestra, so the horns don't need that much help, but definitely doubling them with the cello gives it a very soaring quality that the horns by themselves don't always have. And also, if the horns are going to be playing the melody, just put all the horns on the melody. Like, yeah, you can DVC them and you can break them up and play counterlines and stuff. But if you want to be on the safe side and you really just want that horn melody to come out on top and just, be the most soaring thing possible, just put all the horns on the melody. No harm done. Don't be afraid to have people play in unison. It's fine. You don't need to split out every player onto their own line. Number 2, dovetailing. Very often you will have the woodwinds play with the strings. So strings can play runs endlessly, of course. Woodwinds cannot because they have to breathe. So what do? They employ something that is similar to choir breathing. You know, when a choir is trying to hold a note longer than they normally can, they do choir breathing, meaning the different singers breathe at different spots so that it seems like they're holding this note endlessly when really, they're all just breathing quietly in different spots to hide the breathing. And so you can do something similar with endless woodwind lines, for example, endless runs that just go on for pages and pages. So say you have two flutes, so then you would have the first flute start the runs, play the run for like 2 bars or something, and then as it tails out, before they get a break, the second flute will taper in. So they will have overlapping notes for a portion of the run, and then the second flute takes over for 2 bars, plays the runs, so the first flute can breathe, and then the first flute dovetails in again while the second flute tails out. You can do that if you have double woodwinds, a double setting, so 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets. They can just do that with each other, and it will be very seamless. You will not actually hear that it's 2 players. You can also use that as a color though, so if you only have singular woodwinds, you can do this between like flute and clarinet, or oboe and clarinet or something, or flute and oboe. You will have a color change then, of course, but that's okay. You can use that deliberately as well. But so dovetailing is how you usually solve the issue that woodwinds just can't play for endless amounts of time. They need to breathe at some point. The same thing goes for if you have runs up, for example, like say you have like a grand finale or something, or whatever, big crescendo, and you have woodwind runs that go all the way from like the bass range all the way up to like the piccolo range. Then you will have the low instruments start, and then the other instruments slowly come in. And while the low instruments start to fade out because they're out of range at some point, the high instruments take over, but it's all overlapping. So it seems like one continuous run up, when really it's all the woodwind instruments just kind of interlocking to make that uninterrupted run happen. Here's a word of wisdom. You need at least 3 strings to make it sound like a section. Let me explain. If you have a chamber-sized string section, you always want to make sure that at least, say, 3 violins are on the same line playing in unison. You don't want 2. 2 is bad. Why is it bad? Because they're gonna be slightly out of tune with one another. Because on a violin, I mean, a tiny fraction of a millimeter already changes the pitch very slightly, and they're going to try to correct themselves and play in perfect unison, but it's so hard to do. And so they're going to be very slightly off, and you're going to hear that. However, when you have 3 violins, it kind of evens out. You cannot, like, they're going to be slightly off, but it's going to even out to the correct pitch. Like, your ears are automatically going to hear it like a section and hear one correct pitch, unless someone is completely off, but that's unlikely with professional players. It's a bit less of a problem in the lower string sections, but definitely with violins and violas, you always want to make sure you have at least 3 people on a line. It's similar to, you know how on the piano in the higher register, you have several strings for the same note and they're all slightly detuned, but you're hearing one pitch? That's pretty much what's happening. Interesting side fact, if you want to double the volume or the perceived loudness of one violin, you don't need 2 violins, you need 10. So 2 violins do not sound twice as loud as 1 violin. Make your piece work without percussion first, unless, of course, it's a completely percussion-driven piece and the percussion is in the forefront. Yes, okay. But if it's a melodic piece or a harmonic piece or both, or, counterpoint, whatever is happening, and the percussion is not meant to be in the forefront, make your piece work without percussion first. It's something that we learned at conservatory, but also reading Korsakov's orchestration book. Apparently this has already been a problem like 100 years ago or more. He says young composers overcompensate by overwriting for percussion. This might be true. Just saying. But so to fix that, what I do usually is if I write a score like Fearless, for example, or the Klaus family, or any of those more traditional orchestral scores with melodies and stuff, I will first write it without percussion. Every cue first gets written without percussion in it. And then the percussion is added later, because the percussion is only meant as accents or to enhance something or as a color, but it's not meant to take the center stage of the piece. So in any of these scores, you could take out the percussion and it would totally still work. In most of the compositions of the composers that we admire, you could take out the percussion and it would still work 100%. Here's another thing I learned at a session. So I was in London at AIR, the London Symphony, so whatever went wrong was definitely going to be my fault. And so we were playing through this piece, and we had three trumpets, and they were playing like a somewhat high melody line, but not at the edge of like the range. And they were just consistently out of tune. And I couldn't figure out why, because this was not a particularly difficult line, but also it's the London Symphony, so obviously it's not their fault. And thankfully we had a very experienced orchestrator there, and he said, trumpet number 3 dropped down an octave. And all of a sudden everything was in tune. So they only had trouble playing in unison with 3 people, not with 2 people. And now they had this really great foundation an octave lower from the 3rd trumpet. I don't know why this worked. I don't know what the secret here is, but it's something I learned that day, and something that was fixed very quickly thanks to having an experienced orchestrator there. This is why having experienced orchestrators at sessions is so important, because I wouldn't have known how to solve this. Now I know, so if this ever pops up again, I know how to fix it. But yeah, this is something I learned that day. I hope this was helpful. I can make more of these. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I don't say that very often in my videos, but I was told that I should say it more often, so like and subscribe and hit the bell so you get notifications when I upload more content.